Good morning, everyone. First of all, welcome, and thank you for coming to what is my first press conference since I assumed the office at the City Attorney's office. Hopefully, it's a sign of good things to come, and stay tuned. I'd like to thank Assemblymember Mike Gipson for his leadership on the important piece of legislation that we're going to be discussing here today. As many of you know, eradicating the sex trafficking of minors, particularly along the Figueroa Corridor, it is one of California's most notorious prostitution tracts and an epicenter for the sex trafficking of minors. And it's been a priority of mine since I assumed office. Figueroa Street is located just a few miles south of City Hall, and I'm really grateful to Mayor Karen Bass, to Councilmember Harris Dawson, and to Assemblymember Mike Gipson for their leadership on these issues and on helping us with the trafficking. I am really proud to have worked alongside Assemblymember Gipson to introduce the legislation that brings us here today, Assembly Bill 2419. It provides law enforcement with a tool to address the ongoing challenges that exist in trying to gather evidence to hold predators accountable when they solicit a minor for an act of prostitution. As a former police officer, Assemblymember Gipson understands the unique challenges that law enforcement often faces in trying to investigate these types of incidents, challenges that I've learned about in the last year. So this is, to me, about protecting California's most vulnerable victims from human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And if passed, it's a critical step to help law enforcement do just that. I would like to thank members of my team, Khalil Rashid, Lara Drino, Travis Austin, and Kevin James, who really have worked very closely to get this legislation in hand. I also want to thank my friends at LA City View for always being with us to cover important issues in public. With that, I will turn it over to Assemblymember Gipson to discuss the legislation in greater detail.
I want to say good morning and buenos dias. I want to thank our Madam City Attorney for being here today and all of you who gather. My name is Mike Gipson. I proudly represent the 65th State Assembly District. Those are areas of Watts Willowbrook, where I was born and raised, Compton, Carson, North Long Beach, Harbor, Gateway, North and South, Harbor City, Wilmington, and San Pedro. It is important to me to make the public aware, our parents aware, of this new piece of legislation that I proudly introduce to each of you today, Assembly Bill 2419. This critical public safety piece of legislation is supported by my colleagues in the California State Assembly, community, members of the Los Angeles City Council, and yes, Madam City Attorney. Assembly Bill 2419 is to ensure that Los Angeles, the Los Angeles we know, the Los Angeles we love, act and take bold steps against trafficking, exploitation of our daughters and sons. It is irrelevant whether or not our DNA matches theirs. It is irrelevant whether or not these are our biological children. Every child in California, we have a responsibility and a duty. These are our daughters, these are our sons. And we stand together today in solidarity to protect them from predators that lurk in dark places, seeking to hurt our children, our most vulnerable, black and brown children, children of immigrants, children who live in poverty, children who speak different languages, children who are being victimized by pimps in our community, to intimidate them, to kill them, to threaten them. I am determined to make our streets a safer place for everyone. It is horrible to think that our children are being sought after in this space. Assembly Bill 2419 will authorize a search warrant to be issued on the grounds that there is evidence of a minor being solicited for an act of prostitution. Whether an act of prostitution is set to happen currently, in the future, or in the past, based on probable cause. And it is interesting that we must do everything that we can. This has become an epidemic in our community, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I am firmly supporting the crackdown and the act of violence towards our children. This will make a safer community because of the bold action that Assembly Bill 2419 presents today. I was born and raised in Watts. This bill, this policy is personal to me. And let me tell you the reason why. On January the 8th, 2022, a 16-year-old little girl was found dead by the California Highway Patrol along the 110 freeway, the Manchester on-ramp. Her mother was a paraplegic, lived in Compton. She was shot in the neck twice. She was a victim of sex trafficking on 2 occasions. And her assailant threw her out on the 110 freeway, the Manchester off-ramp, as a piece of trash. 16 years old, human trafficked, on the Figueroa corridor and down the harbor area. We know that sex trafficking exists and our children are being forced into prostitution. We also know that many of these criminals behind the scenes, behind these acts, prey and come to South Los Angeles from other places. That is why this is imperative that the state of California use tools to find them, to stop them in their tracks and protect our babies who are being exploited. Critical to this fight is that we equip law enforcement with the tools so that they can do search warrants with probable cause, that we can intervene immediately and stop this from happening. Together we say no, not one more child in Los Angeles and California. These tools for local law enforcement being used to be able to decrease what's taking place on our streets. We want to strike out, and we want to strike with a bold bat to combat this situation. When these criminals know that their identity can be found out and they could be arrested, hopefully they think twice. I ask the public to join us in calling for a new bold step by supporting Assembly Bill 2419. Again, I want to thank Madam City Attorney for standing with us in a bold way, the Los Angeles City Council, and my colleagues in Sacramento. In closing, let me again just thank our City Attorney for standing and raising and elevating this growing situation in our community. Assembly Bill 2419, it is a necessary step in the right direction to protecting our children. Thank you very much.
Buenos días, bienvenidos y gracias a todos por estar aquí y participar en esta primera conferencia de prensa en mi oficina. Mi nombre es Hydee Feldstein Soto y estoy aquí como su representante y servidora abogada de la ciudad. Primeramente, le quiero dar las gracias al asambleísta Mike Gipson por su atención a esta legislación tan importante que vamos a platicar acerca de ella hoy. Como muchos de ustedes saben, una de las iniciativas más importantes para mí desde asumir este puesto ha sido erradicar o por lo menos disminuir la trata de personas, o por lo menos disminuir la trata de nuestras niñas y nuestros niños menores de edad a través de la calle Figueroa. Tan solo unas pocas millas de aquí, de nuestra alcaldía, la calle Figueroa ha sido conocida como un mercado al aire libre para la prostitución, la droga y el crimen, un centro descarado de trata de personas y tráfico sexual inclusivo a nuestros jóvenes. Estoy muy agradecida por el apoyo y el liderazgo de nuestra alcaldesa Karen Bass, del representante del octavo distrito Marquise Harris Dawson y del asambleísta Mike Gipson por su liderazgo en esta legislación. Es mi honor y un placer trabajar junto a nuestro asambleísta Mike Gipson para presentar este proyecto de ley, AB 2419. Esta ley es un paso adelante en la lucha contra la trata de jóvenes, ya que permite que un tribunal emita órdenes de búsqueda a base de comunicaciones solicitando un acto de prostitución de una joven menor de edad. Nuestro asambleísta Gipson bien entiende las dificultades que se presentan cuando nuestros oficiales de la policía están tratando de llevar a cabo sus investigaciones de este tipo de crimen, ya que él tuvo una carrera de policía antes de asumir su puesto en la Asamblea Estatal. Este proyecto de ley protege a las víctimas menor de edad más vulnerables de California y ayuda a la policía en sus investigaciones en contra de los traficantes y los depredadores. Estoy agradecida y les doy mil gracias a los miembros de mi equipo que están aquí hoy, Kevin James, Khalil Rashid, Travis Austin y Lara Drino, quienes están conmigo hoy y en todo este trabajo. También le quiero dar las gracias a mis amigos del equipo de LA City View que siempre están con nosotros con el reportaje para el público. Y con eso voy a invitar a la asambleísta Gipson para hablar de este tema en mucho más detalle. Gracias a todos ustedes por estar aquí hoy. Es mi placer tener esta primera conferencia de prensa.
Any questions?
Yes, for the assembly member, how exactly does this help law enforcement with new rules, I guess what you call it, or it sounds like a change in the authorities that they have when they're pursuing a suspect?
It's a bold move, but it's a minor switch in the law. Right now, if, for example, and I'll just give you a concrete example so that you understand it. If you have a minor with a cell phone and a pimp or a trafficker telling the minor to go to a particular corner and to meet a guy in a yellow Volkswagen who will pay $100 for an act of intercourse, we can't get at that communication as a basis on which to issue a search warrant to a carrier, because without the consummated act, the solicitation of a minor is a misdemeanor, not a felony. So all this does is it adds the misdemeanor of solicitation of a minor. It doesn't involve prostitution overall. Solicitation of a minor for the purpose of prostitution to the list of permissible reasons to go to court on probable cause to get a warrant. So this doesn't permit random arrests. This doesn't permit warrantless searches. It is a change to the criteria of the issuance of search warrants to permit a court to issue a search warrant on the basis of what is now a misdemeanor and otherwise couldn't serve as the basis for the search warrant.
So does it change, pardon me, does it change what happens before that text message example you described, the probable cause? Can somebody say, oh, I believe these are happening, these text exchanges, and then would that create for law enforcement probable cause?
Probable cause, as I suspect you know, is a question of facts and circumstances. That's part of the reason why we did it as a search warrant, so that it goes before a judge. And the person seeking the warrant will have to prove up that there is sufficient probable cause for the issuance. But the predicate violation is now one of the things that you can issue the search warrant to the carrier for, to just get the text messages off the phones. It's a useful tool also because a number, and I'm sorry if I use language that there's a kiddie stroll, is what they call it, and it's really the running of minors along the Figueroa Corridor, and you often have a single predator who's running 5, 6, 7 minors, and this will permit the issuance of a search warrant to the carrier that will tie all of those together and really help to create a case for the U.S. Attorney's Office or for the DA's office to prosecute the felony. Yes?
Do you have any sense of the scope of this problem in the Figueroa corridor? Do you know how many minors are being impacted every year and whether it's growing or getting worse recently?
The corridor has gotten much better since we started this initiative in July. The last statistics that I have from Deputy Chief Tingarides, who now is overseeing the South Bureau and the 77th Street Station, is that homicides are down 62% year over year. Theft, I believe, property crime was down 10%, and physical assaults on the streets were down 6.5%. So we're having a real effect on the corridor. The issue with the evidence has to do with, we've been working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, because a lot of the traffickers who are running multiple minors, it's a federal crime. And it's really something for the U.S. Attorney to pursue, but it's difficult to gather the evidence without being able to subpoena the carriers. And when there's a minor, there's a question of whether or not the minor can consent to the search of a phone that's owned by a pimp. And so this is a tool that enables us to get the search warrant, to get the text messages, to get the phone calls, and to be able to prove up the case so that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt when you bring it to court.
Can you, I'm sorry, I just want to make, because a lot of our listeners, me included, I don't have law degree, I'm not an attorney.
My deepest sympathies.
Because
Because I talk in legalese sometimes.
Well, that's okay, but that's why, forgive me for being too elementary in my question here, but can you give me an example of a situation where this law, or this assembly bill becomes law, benefits law enforcement in a way that people will understand, oh, okay.
You have a cell phone from a minor and a John. The officers, undercover or decoys or whoever, come in to arrest. And as they're talking to the minor, and she says, well, yeah, my boyfriend, my friend, texted me to be here. And the gentleman was going to pay me $100. And as they're talking, the pimp shows up. She climbs up. Nobody says anything. There's enough statements on the record to constitute probable cause. But because there was no actual consummation of the act, there isn't the predicate crime to go after for a search warrant. So the crime of solicitation of a minor is a misdemeanor within my jurisdiction. It's typically not the basis on which to issue a search warrant. So this just enables us to go, and again, it's not officers in the field able to do more than they otherwise would. They still have to go back to court and get a search warrant. But that, it enables that piece of evidence to be considered by the judge in issuing the warrant. Was that English as opposed to legalese?
Well, yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it becomes an issue of being treated more like a felony in the pursuit of that piece of evidence. No, because it doesn't change the punishment. It doesn't change the sentencing. It doesn't change what you can charge. Okay? It is just that this is the kind of misdemeanor that where you have proof of it, okay, it is sufficiently important to us to be able to protect our minors, to have a court issue the warrant. And so we are adding it to the list of matters that a court can issue a warrant for. And I'm going to look at Travis and make sure I didn't misstate that. That's correct.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
One last quick question. Could you talk a little bit about where the impetus for this bill came from? Was it police officers saying they're finding it hard to get the amount of evidence to issue these warrants, or was it from within your department?
Okay, we have, I don't like the word rescue usually. We have assisted, 60 minors in getting off Figueroa Street in the last 8 months. And Lara runs our Children Exposed to Violence program. Travis has been drafting the legislation, and Khalil runs our Neighborhood Courts program, so that he focuses on various geographic areas. The impetus came out of my criminal branch, and it really has to do with our prosecutors' ability to prove up a case. And it came from dialogue with the U.S. Attorney's Office as to what they needed for federal charges. And we made this fix. We worked closely with Assemblymember Gipson and the structure of it, and to make sure that, as I said, it's still got all the procedural protection of a search warrant. It just enables us to go get one.
Sorry, when you say you helped 60 minors get off of Figueroa Street, what exactly does that?
We don't force people to accept services, and we are not arresting anyone who's a sex worker, minor or adult. But we do connect, especially children, although adults as well if they wish, with services and with providers. So whether it's Journey Out or it's a group called Sister Friends, we work with providers who specialize in helping children and teenagers get to a place of safety and do trauma-informed care so that they can start to heal.
Now, I would want to just add one point with the city attorney and what happened on January the 8th of 2022. As I indicated, 16-year-old young girl, mother, bedridden, tried to do everything she could to make sure her child was in a safe space. And this young girl in the newspaper revealed how horrific her death was, and then tied it to sex trafficking, 16 years old, and then thrown out on the off-ramp like a piece of garbage. This was an answered prayer because I wanted to make sure that I did something. And I'm very grateful to our city attorney for one, coming and us working together to try to solve this very growing issue and giving law enforcement the tools to try to combat this, but also raising the awareness. No child should die like this. No child should be human trafficked in this city, in this country. And we're doing our part to making sure this doesn't happen to anyone's child in this state.